I owe it to the families and the public to be open and forthright. They will likely find the contents of this report to be shocking and sad. But I hope that they will find some consolation in the fact that the lessons we have learned leave us much better equipped to safeguard the vulnerable and those who have been marginalized.
That is Vancouver's Deputy Police Chief. He was speaking Friday after his internal review of the Robert Pickton case was made public. The report revealed that Vancouver Police and the RCMP made serious mistakes while investigating the disappearance of dozens of women from BC's Lower Mainland. One of those women, Cara Louise Ellis. Her remains were found on Pickton's farm. Her sister-in-law, Lori Ann Ellis, spoke with CBC Calgary shortly after the report was released.
It's nice that they're taking the time to say, I'm sorry for what happened. But, you know, when you make an error of this magnitude, lives depended on them doing their job, and they just didn't. They really dropped the ball. And they're saying that Pickton could have been caught as early as 1999. I think they can take back time and say 97, because that's when he was arrested for attempted murder. And they would have had the ability to search his farm, and they didn't. My sister-in-law's DNA was already there.
John Larsen has been joining us throughout the summer to talk about crisis communications. He is a principal with the Corporate Group, a Calgary public relations firm. He helps corporations and public agencies manage their messages. And John is here to talk about effective apologies when you have to admit that you got it wrong. And John, good morning.
Good morning, Kathleen.
In some cases, though, I think it's fair to say, in particular with the Pickton case, that an apology isn't enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing that an apology always has to have is it has to have believability, and you do that by creating a sense of trust, and that trust is with the listener. So sometimes people say, you know, too little, too late. How do you create that sense of trust? Well, number one is you have to acknowledge what happened. Right up front, acknowledge what happened, and acknowledge what was the result of that. So if you made a mistake, what actually occurred because of that, and recognize the damage done. And then the third thing you have to do is you have to commit to something that will rectify that situation. You know, most people will look at any organization or even an individual and they'll forgive them once. But heavens forbid if it happens more than that.
The key part of what you just said, it seems to me, particularly in the Pickton case, but we can talk about others as well, is the timing of it. You wait too long to do it, that there's a reluctance then sort of associated with the apology, and it may be sincere, but that there's something lacking when it comes too late.
Absolutely. I mean, a good message and a very good messenger can be lost if the timing is too late. I think if we look back not too far back, we can look at Toyota as an example. A very good apology if you look at it sort of anatomically, but a lot of people said that came out too late, and in some sense they were forced to apologize. So if any organization is seen to be forced to apologize, it loses its legitimacy very quickly.
Whereas a company that got ahead of it, it seems to me at least, would be Maple Leaf. The head of Maple Leaf Foods came out right away after that listeriosis crisis.
Absolutely, and Maple Leaf has been looked at in many cases as sort of the casebook sample of how to do things right. And I think the key ingredient for that was believability, and it was heartfelt. And the one key thing is whether or not something was intended or not is not the issue. If it creates damage, you have to get out in front of it, and they did a fantastic job of that.
There's a difference, I would think, between corporate apologies and government apologies. And the difference being corporations represent shareholders, so there is an impact on value. I suppose you could say governments represent shareholders as well, but their shareholders are the people of Canada.
The public good.
Yeah. And we've seen a number of apologies from government recently. Air India comes to mind, of course. Residential schools is a big one. And I know an apology that Calgarians were listening to very carefully, and it came pretty late, frankly, and that was from the Finance Minister, Jim Flaherty, the decision to tax income trusts.
Absolutely right. One of the things that organizations sometimes do is they focus a lot of time on explaining what happened or creating excuses for what happened, and when you're in that apology stage, that is not what people want to hear. To his credit, when the Finance Minister did acknowledge this and did apologize for it at a forum, again, it was well done, but people come back and they say, like we talked about with Toyota, was it too little and was it too late?
Mm-hmm. When people apologize for words as well, for something that they may have said, what always strikes me, and a lot of people use this phrase, I'm sorry if people were offended. That's not quite the same thing as saying, I'm sorry I was offensive.
Absolutely. You have to apologize for your actions. And if we take it outside the corporate context for just a minute, he's in the news again, of course, this week as Tiger Woods, now officially divorced. Tiger Woods stood up, and it was a massive production, his apology. And I think if you survey the vast majority of people, nobody believed it one bit. Because there wasn't that really intent apology for what had happened because of those actions. And so I think that's really what people want to see. The First Nations one, incredibly powerful apology in the House of Commons around residential schools. And what created lift in that apology for the government, in my view, is that the First Nations people generally were behind that. You had the advocates right there saying, this is powerful, this is meaningful, and this creates trust with us.
Yeah, the part about I'm sorry if people were offended that always strikes me is it's sort of putting the onus on the reaction of people. In other words, it's not because I said something offensive necessarily. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But you clearly thought I did. So because you feel that way, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Indeed. And again, that aspect that somebody is compelled to appear in front of the people that they may have offended, it simply doesn't wash. And it's at a very intuitive level. And people have a way of judging that pretty quickly.
For corporations and governments both, a part of what they factor in, it seems to me, what apology to make or how to make it or to whom to make the apology is if there's any liability as well. And so lawyers get involved pretty heavily in apologies, don't they?
They do, and legal oversight is important. I mean, we can't be overly naive about this and say that people just go out 2 minutes later and apologize openly without any thought as to what they're going to say. So legal oversight is incredibly important. Certainly what I'd recommend is that it's not your lawyer that actually does the apologizing. It's not your lawyer that is the front for the company, and that needs to be somebody at that executive level. We've seen examples here. I think the most recent one was Syncrude, where there was a lawyer representing the organization, and really the organization got some blowback. The company got some blowback because of that. So lawyers need to be involved, absolutely, but should they be the front person? No, that should be the chief executive initially, and then that apology can be carried forward by other people within the organization. It can be public relations people, it can be anybody else, as long as they're legitimate and they're very sincere in what they're saying.
Am I right in assuming that we're apologizing more?
We are apologizing more, and that is a direct function of the expectations of our publics. And there's really nothing wrong with that. I think what we have to look at is why are we apologizing more? What is happening? And really sort of take one step back and see if we can't re-examine some of the causes that's creating the apologies in the first place.
Do you have an answer to that question?
No, it is all over the board. I mean, we see a lot of apologies associated with what I'd loosely call the environmental file. We see a lot of apologies coming out of sort of how we treat people in the workplace, those sorts of things. So again, it all comes from leadership, whether it's leadership on a file, whether it's leadership in terms of how a company is run and how they treat people's money or people's expectations. At the end of the day, it's about leadership, it's about getting your people out there, and it's about making the changes so that you don't have to be back out there 6 months later apologizing for something similar.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry we don't have more time.
It's an interesting topic.
I apologize.
Thank you,
John, thanks.
Accepted.
John Larsen is a principal at the Corporate Group, a public relations firm here in Calgary. He specializes in crisis communications.